All right, welcome back to Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Davis from Pequot Lakes PD. He has 25 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Davis. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So 25 years in law enforcement. I was hoping you can give a little bit of background because you actually have an interesting background before you got into law enforcement, but then also what those 25 years looked like for you.
Yeah, so after high school, I joined, actually during high school, I joined the military, was a paratrooper for 3 years out in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And then another 11 years I did in the Guard, deployed to Iraq. But after the first 3 years of active duty, I went to school for law enforcement and then got hired within a couple of years of actually just a few months after being done with law enforcement school at the local sheriff's office. So did the sheriff's office thing for a few years, 17 to be exact, and then got hired here with the Pequot Lakes Police Department, and then been chief for the last 2.5 years.
I love how you said a few years and then you say 17 years. Like just a few years. I love that you have experience. I don't know if I told you offline that I used to be a professional skydiver. Did I tell you this?
Yes, you did.
Yeah. So when we talked, I was like, "Oh, that's so cool because you know exactly what it's like to jump out of planes."
Right. Yep. A little different than what you were doing. All ours were static line, but and not quite as high as yours, but yeah, it's similar.
Did you have round parachutes, or did you have square parachutes?
We had the round parachutes.
Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
that's what I
And
thought.
didn't have a whole lot of control over them.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because you're like, it's a little bit different than what I did, but what you did was scarier because jumping out from a lower distance, like you said, you don't have a ton of control. You can't maneuver those canopies as well.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that's so fun to know that you had that experience. I'm curious to know throughout your career, did you have any mentors that helped you out along the way?
Both in the military and probably yes, in law enforcement. Military, you looked up to the older soldiers, or maybe even like your team leader or your platoon sergeant. Um, to get you through difficult situations. If you didn't know, especially in the military, if you didn't know what you were doing, you looked up to those guys. I mean, you were being constantly being trained, and we're constantly training. And then also in law enforcement, you looked up to the guys with, starting out after you get off your FTO, you know, you're not going to go through every situation during FTO. So you're going to have lots of questions. And you look to your partners that have had 6 months to a year, 4 or 5 years on, or your first line supervisor as well, to look for answers, or
Yeah.
just to run a scenario. Hey, what do you think if I handle the situation this way, or what do you think of this idea type of thing?
Yeah.
So the biggest thing, obviously, in law enforcement is just being able to make a decision. Hopefully, it's the right one every time. But you've got partners there to help you out. If they think something, hey, I think we should take this into a different direction, type of thing.
Well, I think that's important for anyone who's listening to realize that the younger kids, I'll say kids, guys, girls, are looking up to you for those answers. You know, they're looking to you and your experience as a direction forward. Was there any nugget of information or any lesson that you learned that really stuck with you?
Probably the biggest one, and I'm sure a lot of other chiefs and sheriffs and supervisors will say this. Um, in this job, you got to be able to make the decision. You can't be, for lack of a better term, hem hawing around, because then you start, let's say if you're on a call or something and you're dealing with some unruly people, they'll see that, they'll
Mhm.
hone in on that, and then they'll be able to manipulate that officer. Whereas if you come in, they see that you're able to make a decision right away. They may not mess with you, um, sort of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I would imagine that it all comes down to your confidence in your training. And if you have
Right.
training, then you feel like you have the confidence to make those decisions in a quick and effective way.
Right. And that's what I tell new guys is be able to make a decision when you're on a call. And that was always told to me, and especially when I started my field training, just show the field training officer that you can make the decision. If it's not the one that he wants to see, if it's not the right one, that field training officer will guide you, or he'll stop you and tell you, no, we need to move in this direction,
Right.
but they do want to see that you need to make a decision now, not him haw around for 5 or 10 minutes, when a task has to be dealt with at that time.
Well, excuse me, I would imagine that's incredibly stressful because you can't prepare for every single experience that you're going to have on the streets until maybe you're in that situation. And so, and then, obviously the question also comes up right now of people being afraid to make decisions because of cameras and social media and all the things. And so, how do you give the confidence for maybe a situation that someone's not necessarily, I wouldn't say trained for, but maybe something that someone hasn't experienced yet?
That's where I was going to go back to training. Yeah, you may not have experienced that specific call, but you've trained on something similar, and that's where it's like, okay, rely on that training. Or if whatever ideas are going through your head, try those different ideas out.
Yeah.
And if time permits, every officer has a phone on them or a radio. They can rely on another officer, and especially where we're in a rural location. We're a small town, 2,500 people. We're a six-man department. During the daytime we have two guys on, but at night we rely either on the county to come back us up or the next neighboring towns. And the neighboring towns are good at backing each other up, and that's where you can bounce ideas off of those officers if you're not confident or have never experienced that certain call.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I know that, this career is really stressful. And when we talked offline, you told me a little bit about your experience with stress and how that has impacted your personal life. Are you willing to share a little bit about what your experiences have been, over the last 25 years?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess, I mean, everybody deals with stress in different ways. And for me, I've never been one to turn to a bottle of alcohol or anything. I guess I've always had that in the back of my head. I'm not going to turn to that. Not saying that I have never done that, but
Sure.
um, it's just one thing. I guess like when I worked with the sheriff's office, so the structure there was when I was a patrol officer with the sheriff's office, it was a sergeant and five or a sergeant and four patrol officers. And after working it for 17 years, you build good relationships with your fellow officers. And there was one or two that, um, I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky type of guy, but my one good partner who's, I used to call him Grumpy. Um, Him and I were in the same squad one day. I think I was getting some work done on my vehicle, but we were riding around for an hour, and he could tell something was going on with me. He goes, "What?" He goes, "You're not yourself. You're not." I'm the type of guy that I'm the fun guy on the team. I like to joke around, pull pranks on people, and he noticed that I wasn't myself. And I don't remember exactly what I was stressed out about, but there was something going on. And he could see that, and just riding around with my partner at the time, kind of, um, I was able to talk to him about what was going on and kind of, lack of a better term, de-escalate, even though we weren't de-escalating a situation, but just kind of decompress is what I was trying to think of. Just decompress with him, because I know he's in turn, I've seen issues with him, where him and I have relied on each other with different issues, and we've been on numerous stressful calls, car accidents where people have been killed to, different deaths, other death scenes where, the general public doesn't see on a daily basis. But it's nice to have partners like that where you can rely on each other, because it's not something I want to bring home to my wife because she can see different things, what, that I may be stressed about something, but it's like I'm not going to share the stuff that we see with her. Maybe in certain such situations I might where she really sees something and yeah, something's going on, but you need to talk to me about it type of thing. But just rely on partners and it's like my partner I was giving an example of there, good guy, he's not going to go around and tell everybody about, what we're talking about. So, I had great confidence in him and I still do to this day.
That's the word that came up in my head is having confidence and trust to be able to talk to someone when things are getting to you. But I also think it's a testament to him to be able to look at you and say, hey, like you're not acting like you normally do. What's going on? Are you okay? How do you train people within your organization to be able to look for those signs and have that confidence to ask the question, are you okay? Do you need anything? Because I think that so often, I hear stories about either people not noticing signs or they do
Right.
notice the signs and maybe they're afraid to ask the questions.
Right. I think yeah, just being there for your guys. I mean, of course, after doing this for 25 years and now becoming a police chief, that's where you got to look back and it's like, okay, I got to make sure I'm checking in with my guys from time to time. Bring them into my office and just say, hey, how's things going? Do you see where do you see yourself in a couple of years? What types of training do you want to go to? How's the family life and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that those things go a long way. You, especially as a chief, taking time out of your day to say, like, how are you? Like, how are things going and to genuinely care? I know that through other conversations that that's something that goes a long way. And I'm curious, like, how do you find time to do that with all of your other administrative tasks and job
Just
expectations?
you gotta basically just like I got a call on a background, and I just got up to before coming online with you. I was on the phone with a background investigator, and he had called me and emailed me last week. And of course, last week I was in a class all week, and so I just basically got to sometimes you just got to drop what you're doing and make that a priority.
Yeah.
Of course, you're setting on the side burner or put it off a little bit. But to me, I think the mental health aspect has to come first, or at least checking on your guys has to come first before some of this other stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right, making it a priority because, your people are your most valuable asset. So how can you make sure that they're good so that they can perform, on the job and make effective decisions, like you said before, but how can they also show up as the best versions of themselves for their family as well. And I know when you and I talked a little bit, and even on this conversation, you talked a little bit about how you don't want to like inundate your family or your partner with the things that go on in the job, and so you have other outlets to be able to offload some of the more specifics. Has there ever been a time where maybe some of the stress did pour into your home life or affect your home life? And how did you manage that? Because I know that that is a conversation we have all the time is the importance of home wellness and being able to, disconnect from the job and have a strong family unit at home. How did you manage that?
So I got two examples. First one will be so I was deployed to Iraq from 2005 to October of 2005 to July of 2007. And so when I came back, in '07, I took a month off from coming back to the sheriff's office at the time. And when I did come back, work was going great and everything, but I was bringing some of that stress home, whether it was um, I wasn't that happy-go-lucky guy when I would come home, if something might set me off,
Yeah.
and finally, after 2 years of my wife dealing with this, she finally said, hey, you need to go get some help because I can't deal with this anymore. Either you need to move out or get some help. I chose the latter and got some help through the VA. And I let my partners know that too, that I was working with, the ones that I confided in, and just talk to them. Um, and that helped. I was able to get the help, and it made home life that much more better, or got it back on track, I should say. And then another time there was a car accident in our jurisdiction that my team did the investigation on. It was a little 4-year-old boy had been killed by somebody who passed on the right-hand side illegally. And of course, I had kids that were the same age at the time, and that one really hit home.
Yeah.
And that was one where that day when I was, get home a couple hours late, and you get home, well, my wife and kids weren't home. They were over at her mom and dad's place, and it's like, which is next door, thankfully. When I got home, you know, changing everything, it's like I called my wife. I said, I need to see the kids now. I just had to see them, give them a hug, just because of seeing the little boy laying on the side of the road. I mean, that hit home, and that one, those incidences, we had a critical incident debrief, which helps. And then my partner took the lead on the accident investigation. Him and I would talk, and we were pretty tight. So um, just having somebody to lean on is a big part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't imagine that you can ever prepare yourself for something like that, and
No, no, it's I don't think you can take any training on it or anything like that. It's um, trying to find the resources to deal with it afterwards, unfortunately.
yeah. And I know you said that um, critical incident debriefs, having some sort of, I know that you're small and so peer support might not be necessarily an option, but having people to talk to about those things, having options maybe through EAP. What are some things that you guys have tried organizationally that has worked, or maybe some of the things that are challenges for you guys since you are a smaller agency?
Um, for us, like those critical incident debriefs, it'll be an outside entity that comes in and checks in on the people or hosts these things, if you will, and they give out resources. I guess it's never been bad enough for me where I've had to, other than with the VA, when I came home from my deployment, I've just been able to deal with it, talking to friends and whatnot. But there are resources that they do have available at these debriefs. So there's information at those that they give out to the officers or whoever was involved.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who maybe is struggling but afraid to raise their hand and ask for resources?
You just, I would say you gotta, first of all, probably if you're not willing to call somebody, try to talk to somebody that you trust. I mean, just start out with that. That in itself, just getting it off, just talking about it will be a burden lifted off your shoulders. Um, yeah, that's the biggest thing, is just trying to find confidence in somebody to talk to. If you're not willing to go get professional help, at least try and talk to a good friend, or maybe a pastor, or if they go to church or something like that. Um, but yeah, don't hold it in, don't bottle that stuff up.
Yeah, I think that it's so difficult to talk about things sometimes, but it's so important. It's so important to have those hard conversations, to raise your hand and say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this." And also understanding that if you were in a situation like you were and you see a 4-year-old child ran over on the side of the road, that is not a normal situation. And if you have a response to that where you need resources, that is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. No one should have to see that, especially if you have kids that you can relate to that. Like that is such a hard, traumatic experience. And if you need help, it doesn't mean that you're weak or you're broken. It means that you're having a normal response to something that is abnormal. And so I think the more we have these conversations, the more we can give permission to people to say,
Right.
hey, like that is a hard thing. And you need the resources as a human to be able to process those things. And I think it goes back to this conversation of, you talked about it a little bit earlier. I think that historically, maybe the way to process those things was drinking, or, we heard it like going to church or choir practice, and
Right.
we know substance use has been a coping mechanism that has been used in the past. And I think that that is one of the easier ways to cope with things, right? Because the hard thing is to deal with it and to process it. The easy thing is to avoid and escape and numb that thing. And so
Right.
having an understanding that there are unhealthy coping mechanisms for these situations and there are healthy coping mechanisms. And talking to someone, reaching out for wellness resources, those are healthy coping mechanisms. Talking to a trusted partner or spouse or therapist or, like you said, pastor or, whoever it is that you need to do that with, versus going and drowning it away in a bottle of booze.
Right.
Um, and we hear this a lot, and I really am curious to hear your perspectives on this because I think that when we talk about unhealthy coping mechanisms, it's something that's kind of brushed over, and we understand that it's an issue, but I also think it's kind of ingrained in the culture a little bit. Like, do you think that maybe substance use is something that's not talked about enough, or how do you think we can address that without it being, because here's the thing, like I go to conferences and everything, and it's like a part of the culture of like grabbing drinks with each other. And so you don't want to like
Right.
shun people for things if they're not doing it in an unhealthy way. So like how do we approach that in a way that doesn't shut people down?
Yeah, I don't, that's a good question. I don't know if I have an answer for it. I mean, that kind of goes back to watching your partners and keeping an
Mhm.
eye on them. Maybe there's little hints that are indicating that they might be having an issue with something. But I mean, this job and alcohol kind of, I won't say they go hand in hand, but like you were saying, when you go to conferences, um, you meet new people, you bounce ideas off of them. Well, you're down in the lounge of the hotel that you're staying at,
Yeah.
alcohol's there. Not saying you need to have alcohol, but it's kind of it's kind of been there in the law enforcement realm, if you will. Um, yeah, I guess right now the thing that I can think of is just kind of keeping an eye on your fellow officers and and that really doesn't that pertains to that could pertain to any job or any line of work, as well as I guess thinking back, alcohol was pretty prominent in the military. And I imagine it probably still is. I've been out since '07, but I remember there was times when we come in from a 14-day field exercise and get all your gear turned in, weapons cleaned and all that. Well, where do you go? You go to the liquor store and then come back and, party time.
Yeah.
But yeah, the biggest thing is probably just trying to keep an eye on everybody as best as you can
I
and just let your partners know or employees know that you're there for them. Yep, there's a time to unwind, but be careful with it.
Yeah, I like that approach of, keeping an eye out to see like, is it passing the point where it's maybe going down a bad path, where it's now affecting their family or their job performance, or maybe you're starting to see depression start to come in. And one of the conversations I had recently is, I think that when it comes to any of this stuff, when we're talking about healthy coping mechanisms versus unhealthy, I had someone recently, it was a chief, they said, I work all the time. Like I am always on, I'm working, 24/7. And I'm questioning, like, am I a workaholic? Like, is this something that is unhealthy? And the conversation we had was, I think it's important to understand the intent behind what you're doing to determine if it's unhealthy or if it's healthy. So for example, like let's take like the workaholic mentality because I think we all can relate to that. Like we all work a
Hmm.
lot. We all like you guys love what you do. There's overtime opportunities. As a chief, obviously you're on 24/7. I also love to work a lot. And so I think it's questioning, am I working a lot because I love my job? Or am I working a lot because I'm trying to avoid stresses or challenges at home and I don't want to be there, or I don't want to deal with this traumatic event that I went through. And so I'm going to pour myself into work so that I can avoid and I can escape me
Hmm.
having to deal with it. And so I think that's two totally different intents of like, I just love my job and I'm happy, or I'm really unhappy and I'm trying to avoid whatever situation it is. I think the same thing would go with, alcohol. Are you going out and having a drink because you're happy and you're just, bumping elbows with your buddy, or you're, shooting the shit together and, having a good time? Or are you drinking a bottle of liquor every night because again, you're trying to avoid or escape a numb, or you're depressed and you don't want to deal with it? So I think that if we can self-identify some of those things, am I binge watching TV because like I'm just really into the show and I'm happy and I love it and I want to watch like the last four episodes, or is it because I don't want to deal with my life? So I think
Right.
that what you said is spot on. Like look out for each other and try to identify that in others. But I think more importantly, how can we self-identify? Because I think it's easier to point fingers at other people, but like, are we looking at ourselves too?
Right. Like especially in these smaller communities, the sheriff's office I worked for, covered 1,000 square miles. I think we had 55 sworn officers. So that's for this area, that's a bigger department. And in my police department now, we're only six full-time officers. And of course, I live in this community and I've made the choice to, like, when I go out with my wife somewhere at one of the local establishments, and even if I go to the bigger town where our county seat is, it's 20 minutes away. I've made the choice, especially now as chief, not to drink alcohol in public. Um, just for that's my own choice. I'm not saying, the next person should, but just to me, it's important enough being a department head that I'm choosing not to consume alcohol when I go out, just so that people can't say, "Oh, the chief is always drinking. Now he's getting into his vehicle." That's one of the reasons why I choose not to. Um, yeah, kind of got a brain fog here where I'm going with that, but yeah, I guess that's a choice that hopefully others can see, or a choice that they can take as well. Um,
I think
so yeah,
I think it's smart. I think it's smart to lead by example. I think it's smart because people can draw conclusions to things, and I think even there's even situations where you might not be drinking, but it looks like you're drinking. And then like what are people saying or thinking of that? And I think perception is important, and I have adopted that same thing. I don't drink anyway. Like if I do drink, it's maybe a glass of wine on vacation because we're in Spain and you want like Spanish wine or something,
sure.
but like outside of that, I don't drink. And there's been times where I've had like a soda water and there's like a perception of that, So I think that
Right.
those things matter. And I'm not saying don't live your life, but I am saying that sometimes it's important to understand that people are looking at you and they're trying to determine if your words and your actions match. And if you are, for example, if I am sitting here on a wellness platform and I am preaching wellness, and on all of my social media pages or in my community, I'm out at the bars getting drunk every night, my
Mhm.
actions and my words are not matching, and then the credibility goes away. And people aren't going to listen to the things that you say if you are not living that, and I think people are
Right.
looking to you for that. So, and I think that's a message to anybody. I don't think that you necessarily have to be in leadership. I think maybe the eyes are a little bit stronger when you get into leadership, but I think that that's for everyone who's listening. People are looking at you to see like, is this person legit?
Right. And I think that's, especially in law enforcement, you're in a uniform, so you've already got a target on your back.
Hmm.
Um, it's big in our profession that we are scrutinized probably more than just about any other profession, and then you look at people who are in, clergy, they're set to a higher standard, and we should be set to a higher standard. But yeah, I see where you're going with that. And it's kind of like the do as I say, not as I do type of mentality.
Yeah. And we know that the younger generation is not on board with that.
Right,
They're like,
right.
they're like, wait, why? But why? Like that doesn't make sense. And they're always asking why. And so I am a huge fan, and obviously like this platform is not to tell people how to live their life, but maybe just give different um, perspectives on things. And I just am a huge fan of practice what you preach. Be open-minded to other ways too. Like if someone maybe has a better way of doing things or a different perspective, being open and to learning and be teachable. But I personally am not going to listen to somebody who I think is full of it, and isn't
Right.
really practicing what they're saying. And so, especially I think the younger generation, they're coming in and they want to know the why. They don't want to know, well, this is how we've always done it, or just listen to me. So I think that it takes another level of authenticity to
Yeah,
get people on board.
yeah. And I'm going to take a dig at politicians here, but it's like I've always got that in the back of my mind. Don't be a politician in this job
Mm,
of blowing smoke up people's rear, because people will remember that, especially out on the street. They go into something, maybe they trust you on something, but then you go and do something different. Whereas if you can keep a standard and keep consistent, they'll know, oh, I can rely on so and so, or we can rely on you as far as just being there for you.
yeah, consistency and authenticity are going to create trust, and it takes a long time to build trust, and it takes a split second to ruin
Exactly.
it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and that it goes back to that consistency. How can you maintain that over a long period of time to maintain that trust? Because it is hard. It's like you make one mistake, and all of a sudden, all of that effort into building that trust goes away in a blink.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you, I know, obviously every agency across the country right now is struggling with staffing, recruitment, retention. I know you're a smaller organization. How are you navigating that right now? And how do you still prioritize wellness when everyone is stretched so thin?
Um, there again, luckily right now I'm fortunate to have, I'm fully staffed.
That's awesome.
I thought I was going to lose one of my officers to the neighboring county, but they wanted him to move to the northern edge of their county, and he wasn't willing to do that, which I was thankful for. Um, but there were when I first took over here, there was, like I said earlier, there's six of us sworn officers. When I took over, the previous chief, he won the sheriff's election. So then we were shorthanded at the time anyhow. So then, and we were in the middle of, we had just hired somebody on. So basically, I took over as chief. I was still working nights for a little while because I didn't want to disrupt the other guys' uh, time on and time off. So that after a month, it's like, okay, I got to start working Monday through Friday. You guys, I'm going to have to move you guys, even though it's going to suck for all of us, but it's a sacrifice that we got to do. Um, just making sure that those guys get their time off. And, so we went to the city council and just said, hey, this is what the schedule is going to look like. If you get complaints from the citizens, this is why we're doing this. But I can't have my guys working, they're working 12-hour shifts as it is. And, sometimes we were working 7, 8, 9 days in a row just to make sure we had coverage. But then I also got with the sheriff, my previous chief. He's like, hey, we're willing to work with you. So after these hours, we're going to make sure we cover for you. And of course, the first 4, 5, 6 months, actually, it was probably the first year, I didn't have all my hours covered that I needed to be just because we were trying to get built back up.
Yeah.
And this next October, I think it'll be my first year where I'm fully staffed because I was staffed last Feb or the February before last, fully staffed. And then one of my guys went down to the metro area, got hired. And it's like, okay, now I'm short an officer. So you got to make do for that. Um, and that's no fault of his. He left on good terms and everything, and I still actually talk to him. But it's just making sure that you can still get the time off for your guys. And even if there's not somebody to cover that, well, that's where, well, I gave this officer time off. I'm going to step up to the plate. I'm going to cover a couple of his shifts. Might be a little more stress on my end, but we'll make up for it at some point.
Yeah, I agree with you that having time off is so important. And if you can make that happen where people have time to decompress, unwind, like step away for a little bit, because we know like right now everyone's working so much. Everyone's
Mhm.
working overtime. And I think that sometimes the overtime is because of maybe financial decisions, and needing to work overtime.
Right.
But that's for a whole nother conversation. But I agree with you that, if you can work together to give people time off, then that's a really good way to support mental health and to prevent burnout.
Right. And that's where we're seeing with the younger generation. Like when I started back in 2000, everybody jumped on the opportunity to get overtime. You tried to get as much overtime as you possibly could. Now we're seeing that, and we just discussed this in the class that I was in last week, that this younger generation, they value their time off. Not that us older officers don't value the time off, but when we're younger, you're different generation, obviously. You were willing to go that extra step and go above and beyond. And not saying that this younger generation isn't, but they value their time off.
Yeah.
So you got to take that into consideration when you hire these younger folks because that is important to them.
Yeah. And to your point, like if you want to hire new people and then you want to retain them, you have to speak to the things that are important to them and how can you create a culture, an environment that, does give that space for time off. And obviously you can't cater to everybody. I'm not saying that, but if you
Right.
know that they value that, then how can you make it work to where they're getting a little bit of that?
Yeah. Yeah. We're finding out too that we don't offer any hiring bonuses here or anything, but some of those places that do, they're finding out that money isn't the key to hiring people. It's the time off. Um, and there's one department, I think it's the only one I know of in Minnesota, and it's a smaller agency about the size of mine, maybe a little bit bigger, but the chief there has kind of instituted, if you've been there for 5 years, we're
Yeah,
going to give you a month off
I've heard this.
where you don't have to do burn up your own vacation or anything. We're going to make sure we got coverage for you, but it's just an entire month for you to get away from the job, decompress, charge your batteries up, and you're not going to answer your work phone. You're going to shut it off, and you're not going to even do anything with law enforcement. You're just taking an entire month off. And I don't know if I could do a month here, but I've thought about, hey, maybe that's something I could implement here for
Yeah.
maybe a 2 week time period. I know I could, cover that fairly easily without running too short and make it happen.
Yeah, I've actually.
So I think it may have to have more incentive. Agencies may have to have more incentive, something like that, if that's doable.
Yeah, I actually had two people, and I'm not going to be able to think of the name right in this moment. For anyone who's listening, it's Monday, so we can get off the hook for like the brain fog. But
Right.
I had two conversations about that, two different organizations that were doing that, a sabbatical program where it was, like you said, every 3 to 5 years, every person within the organization gets a month off, and they're not allowed to work at all. They can do whatever they want. They can go on vacation. They can stay at home, but you can't work at all.
Right.
And it was a way to identify, hey, that 3 to 5 year mark is that burnout period where we start to see, we're losing people or performance goes down or, things of that nature. So how can we get in front of that and be more proactive? And I know that the one individual that I spoke to was really hoping that that became something that all agencies implemented across the board. So, like you said, maybe you can't swing a month, but maybe you can swing 2 weeks or 3 weeks. How can you at least have
Mhm.
some time baked in so that and then it's saying, hey, like if we know we're losing people at this time and we can keep them by giving them time off, now we're saving money as an organization because we're not having to train new people, but we're also maintaining our staffing numbers. So I think it's a good idea, but obviously I don't know the ins and outs of all the logistics like you guys do. So
Right.
my final question for you, and this is in the context of wellness, what words of advice would you give to someone who's earlier in their career when it comes to wellness and taking care of themselves? Maybe something you wish you would have known earlier that would have helped you out, or something that did help you out along the way.
Maybe just take time for yourself. That's probably one of the biggest things now that we're talking about this.
Mhm.
Um, and try and find a mentor if you can that can help you through difficult situations. And probably the another takeaway is don't hesitate to ask for help or at least try and identify if you're having issues, go talk to somebody. When I started, I don't think it's probably been until the last maybe 5, 10 years where it's okay to go ask for help. When I first started out in 2000 and probably from about 2015, it seemed like if you were looking to go get help, then there's something wrong with you. That being that we deal with mental health on a daily basis, oh, it looks bad for a cop to go reach out and get help. And part of that persona was that if we're looking for help, maybe we're not fit for the job,
Mm,
type of thing. I actually talked to a psychologist at the VA, and the he had asked me what he didn't know what I did. It was something I volunteered for, some study with the VA where you had to take the MMPI and a couple other um, different mental health tests. And when it came time to sit in on the interview, he's like, "What do you do for a living?" And I told him, and he goes, "Just by the way you answered your questions, I could tell that you were either a firefighter or possibly some area of law enforcement." And I just mentioned to him, I've always answered these questions honestly, but I told him, I said, us law enforcement, at least for me, we're trying to figure out what they're trying to think of us and what they want to hear or what they want to see on these tests and whatnot.
mm,
And it's like just be yourself on those things, and um, yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to get help. Whereas today, I think it's easier to do that.
absolutely. Great words of advice. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you coming on here and sharing your insights and a little bit about wellness. That's all I have for you, but if we missed anything, I'll let you take the floor. But again, I just appreciate your time so much.
No, I think we hit everything that we needed to, and I appreciate you doing what you're doing, and and just taking the mental health portion of this and running with it. So I think it's something that needs to be done. So thank you for that.
Of course. We'll talk soon.
Alrighty.